The first time Karen tried to use my EV charger, she did it like she was entitled to my entire driveway. I had just stepped out with my morning coffee, half asleep, when I saw her bright red Tesla nosed right up against my garage, the charging cable dangling like some kind of electric umbilical cord. She didn't even look at me, she just leaned casually against her hood, scrolling her phone, as if she were parked at a public station. "Good morning," I said, voice flat, sipping my coffee while my brain tried to process whether this was real life or a sitcom pilot. She looked up, tilted her sunglasses down, and gave me this smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Your HOA bylaws require neighbors to share amenities," she announced, like a lawyer arguing in court. I blinked at her. "Amenities? This isn't a community pool. That's my charger. I paid for it, installed it, wired it. The HOA didn't drop it off with a welcome basket." She waved her hand as if I was being pedantic. "Electric charging is a community need. You shouldn't be so selfish. My Tesla needs juice and the public station is 3 miles away. Do you expect me to walk?" That was the first morning it happened. And I knew in my bones, that it wasn't the last. You have to understand something about me. I don't yell. I don't slam doors. I don't let someone else's theatrics dictate my mood. That's not how you win wars like this. You win with patience, sarcasm sharp enough to slice through arrogance, and a little engineering when necessary. So instead of arguing, I sipped my coffee and simply said, "Be careful with that cable. It overheats if it's not plugged in right." Then I turned back inside. That was the beginning of Karen's obsession. By week 2, she was using my charger daily. I'd hear the hum of her car at dawn or late at night, like some vampire slipping in for a fix. At first, I tried reasoning. I explained the power bill wasn't free. I told her she was trespassing. I even printed out the section of the HOA bylaws she quoted and highlighted the part where it said, "Shared amenities," meant playgrounds and walking trails, not someone's garage outlet. She smirked every time. "We'll see what the board says." That was her favorite phrase, like the HOA board was some royal court where she was queen and the rest of us were subjects. What she didn't realize was that the board didn't like her either. She was just loud, persistent, and armed with a knack for twisting rules until they strangled reason. The first escalation happened one Saturday. I came home from running errands and saw an orange extension cord snaking across my driveway. It led straight from my garage outlet to her Tesla, which she'd parked half on my lawn. My charger was locked inside, so she'd improvised. She had the audacity to look proud of herself, as though this hack was some kind of innovation. "You weren't home," she said, folding her arms when I approached. "And my car was at 8%. Imagine if I had an emergency. You wouldn't want to be responsible for that." "Karen," I said slowly, "if you can't plan your charging better than this, maybe you shouldn't drive an EV." Her jaw dropped, and for the first time I saw the raw fury beneath her smugness. It wasn't about electricity anymore. It was about control. She wanted the charger because I didn't want her to have it, and that meant she'd take it every chance she got. I unplugged the cord and coiled it neatly at her feet. She stared at me like I'd just committed a crime. Then she snapped, "I'm taking this to the board." I shrugged. "Bring popcorn. Those meetings are boring." She stormed off, muttering about selfish neighbors and green energy rights. That night I started planning. Here's the thing about EV chargers. They're smart. You can program them. You can limit current, schedule hours, even set them to reject unknown VINs. But that would have been too easy, too boring. I wanted something that would make her stop on her own, something that would feel like her fault. So I adjusted the settings. Nothing dangerous, just a subtle tweak so that any car pulling more current than it should would trip the failsafe. My own car handled it fine. But if someone with a heavier draw tried to freeload? Let's just say the system wouldn't be forgiving. The trap was set. The next morning, I watched from my window as Karen's Tesla rolled up again. She plugged in, crossed her arms, and leaned against her car with that smug little smile. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. At first, it looked normal. The charging light blinked green. But then I saw her expression change. She squinted, frowned, and bent down to check the port. A thin wisp of smoke curled upward. Her eyes widened. She yanked the plug out like it was a snake, and for a split second, I thought she might actually scream. The plastic on her charging port had warped slightly, blackened around the edges. Not catastrophic, but enough to make it clear her car had just had a very bad time. She looked around wildly, as though searching for an audience. Then her gaze landed on me, standing at my window with my coffee, perfectly calm. "What did you do?" she shouted. I raised my mug in salute. "Told you to be careful with that cable." She sputtered, pointed, stomped, but she couldn't form an actual sentence. Finally she spat, "You'll pay for this," and sped off, the acrid smell of overheated plastic lingering in the air. That was only the beginning. Because Karen wasn't the kind of person to retreat. Oh no. The melted port was just the first battle scar in what would become the ugliest little suburban war my neighborhood had ever seen. And me? I was just getting started. When Karen threatened me that morning, I knew she'd be back, and she wouldn't come quietly. People like her don't stop when they lose. They double down until they either crush everyone else or finally crash into their own wall. My job was simply to make sure she found that wall faster. The very next day, I discovered she had already filed an official complaint with the HOA. I knew because the board secretary, a weary retiree named George, slipped a copy of it into my mailbox with a sticky note that said, "Good luck, buddy." That's all he wrote. The complaint was 6 pages long. 6 pages. I swear she must have stayed up all night dictating it into her phone, because it read like a manifesto. According to Karen, I had deliberately sabotaged her right to equal access to community energy infrastructure, which she claimed was a form of discrimination. She wrote that I had caused intentional damage to her Tesla and that my attitude displayed a pattern of hostility towards sustainable transportation. She even included photos of the scorched charging port like she was presenting evidence in a criminal trial. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. I knew the board would hate every minute of reading this, because they already spent half their lives untangling her wild interpretations of the bylaws. Last month she had tried to force everyone to paint their mailbox posts beige for aesthetic cohesion. Before that, she petitioned to ban trampolines because she claimed they were morally hazardous. Still, I didn't underestimate her. Noise and persistence win battles more often than truth. Sure enough, a week later, the HOA sent me a letter scheduling a compliance hearing. It was basically a courtroom drama staged in a stuffy community center, where the board sat in folding chairs and tried to look important. The day of the hearing, I showed up in jeans, polo shirt, calm as a monk. Karen arrived in a power suit, clutching a binder thick enough to stun a cow. She strutted in like a prosecutor about to slam the gavel on me. The board chair, Linda, sighed before it even began. "All right, let's keep this short. Karen, you filed the complaint. Please explain." Karen launched into a performance. She slammed down photos of her car, spoke about environmental justice, quoted bylaws like scripture. She described me as a dangerous, spiteful neighbor who was hoarding electricity while she, an eco-conscious citizen, was being punished for trying to save the planet. She made it sound like I was personally responsible for global warming. When she finally paused to breathe, Linda turned to me. "Do you want to respond?" I stood, slid a single sheet of paper onto the table, and said, "Yes. I'd like to submit my power bill." It was beautifully boring. A neat list of kilowatt-hours, charges, dates. I pointed to the spike that coincided with the week Karen started freeloading. "This is what her car costs me every month. This is not a shared amenity. It's my private outlet, installed with my own money, on my own property. The bylaws she's quoting don't apply." Then I leaned back and added, "As for her car damage, I didn't touch it. But if her charging port melted, maybe she should stop plugging into things she doesn't own. The room went quiet except for the sound of Linda pinching the bridge of her nose. George coughed into his hand to cover a laugh. Karen's face turned crimson. "You're lying. You tampered with it on purpose. Do you have proof of that?" Linda asked. Karen sputtered. "He admitted it to me." Linda looked at me. "Did you admit that?" "No," I said calmly. And just like that, it was over. The board dismissed her complaint with the kind of weary unanimity that comes from people who just want to get home for dinner. Karen stormed out, binder clutched like a shield, muttering threats under her breath. But here's the thing about people like Karen: when they lose in official channels, they don't stop. They escalate outside the rules. The first sign came 2 nights later. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of something clattering on my driveway. When I peeked outside, I saw eggs splattered across my garage door. Classic. Juvenile, but effective if your goal is to annoy. I knew immediately who it was, though of course I didn't have proof. The second sign came 3 days after that. My smart charger app notified me of an unauthorized attempt to connect. Someone had plugged in at 1 a.m. and yanked the cable when it failed to authenticate. Again, obvious culprit. I realized then that Karen wasn't going to stop trying. She wasn't just entitled. She was addicted to the idea of taking something that wasn't hers. Denying her made it worse, like scratching poison ivy. So I changed tactics. I called an electrician friend and asked him to install a little addition, a fake charger. It looked real enough, mounted on the side of the garage, cable coiled neatly. But instead of being wired to the grid, it was wired to nothing. Just a hollow shell. That night, I waited. At 3 a.m., movement triggered my camera. Karen's Tesla nosed into the driveway. She crept out like a cat burglar, glancing around before grabbing the fake cable and plugging it in. She even gave the car a little pat like she'd conquered me. Then she got back inside and waited. Of course, nothing happened. No charging light. No hum. She tried again, frowning, then again, yanking the plug as if brute force might summon electricity. After a solid 10 minutes of frustration, she gave up, peeled away, and left my driveway in silence. I chuckled the entire next day. But here's where the twist came. Karen didn't just give up. She went nuclear. The following weekend, I found a notice taped to my door. A brand new complaint. This time, she wasn't accusing me of damaging her Tesla. She was accusing me of hoarding energy for resale. She wrote that I was illegally operating a private utility, and that my refusal to share electricity was evidence I was profiting by selling it off-grid. It was so absurd I almost admired it. She'd gone from petty theft to full-blown conspiracy theory in under a month. But what really rattled me was the last line of her complaint. "If the board won't act, I will." That's when I realized this wasn't about the charger anymore. It was about domination. She wasn't just trying to take my electricity, she was trying to make me bend, to break, to give her control. And that meant she wasn't going to stop until something bigger forced her to. I knew then that the war had only just begun. So I started planning my next move. Because if Karen wanted escalation, she was about to get it. And this time, the consequences would be hers alone. By the time Karen taped that new complaint to my door, I'd learned 2 crucial truths about her. First, she wasn't satisfied unless she was at the center of conflict. Second, every time she lost, she raised the stakes. It wasn't just persistence, it was escalation as a survival instinct. So when she claimed I was illegally operating a private utility, I didn't laugh it off. I prepared for the storm I knew was coming. The storm arrived sooner than I expected. On Monday morning, a white city utility truck rolled into our cul-de-sac. Out stepped 2 inspectors in reflective vests, clipboards in hand. My neighbors peeked out their blinds as if they were watching a daytime soap. I stepped out with my coffee, always with the coffee, because if you're going to face chaos, you might as well look calm doing it. One inspector looked at his note. "Sir, we received a report that you're operating an unauthorized power distribution system on this property." I raised an eyebrow. "A what?" He glanced at my garage. "A private energy resale system. Do you mind if we take a look?" I almost laughed. Almost. But I kept it straight, because I knew exactly who had made the report. "Sure," I said, motioning toward the garage. "You're welcome to inspect." They checked everything. The panel, the meter, the charger. One of them even crouched down with a flashlight like he was hunting for contraband. After 30 minutes, they concluded what I already knew. Everything was perfectly legal. No hidden wires. No resale. Just one homeowner charging his own car. The second inspector shook his head. "Sorry for the inconvenience, sir. We'll file this as a false report." I sipped my coffee. "No problem. Can I get a copy of that filing?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. We'll email it over." Perfect. Documentation. Because I knew Karen would twist this visit into a whole new saga. Having proof would be my shield. Sure enough, by evening she was out in the street, cornering neighbors with her binder. I overheard her telling old Mrs. Kravitz that I'd been caught red-handed, and the city was shutting down my illegal grid. The poor woman looked horrified. That night, I printed out the inspector's official report and slid a copy into every neighbor's mailbox. Just the facts. No commentary. I knew it would drive Karen insane, because she thrived on controlling the narrative. And now she'd been exposed as the liar. The next morning, her Tesla was parked across my driveway, blocking me in. I stood at the window for a long moment, considering my options. Calling a tow truck would escalate. Yelling would give her satisfaction. Instead, I walked outside, calm as ever. She was waiting, arms folded, sunglasses perched high. "You think you're clever," she said. "Passing out your little flyers. Making me look like a liar." I tilted my head. "You did that yourself." Her lips curled. "You're not going to win this." I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of her car blocking my driveway. "Maybe not today," I said. "But this is obstruction. So, either you move it, or I call the sheriff." For the first time, I saw her hesitate. The sheriff wasn't the HOA board. He didn't care about bylaws or petty feud. He cared about law. And Karen's face flickered with the realization that she wasn't quite untouchable. She yanked the car into gear and peeled away, tires screeching. That was her warning shot. And I knew what came next wouldn't just be inconvenient. It would be dangerous, because Karen had shifted gears from manipulating rules to breaking them. A week later, I came home to find my charger cable sliced clean through, as though someone had taken a pair of garden shears to it. Not frayed. Not worn out. Deliberately severed. I stood there, staring at the dangling end, fury buzzing under my calm exterior. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was sabotage. Malicious, targeted, and expensive. I could have called the police then. I could have filed a vandalism report. But I didn't, not yet. Because I knew how Karen worked. She thrived on confrontation. If I gave her a fight in public, she'd spin it as persecution. So instead, I ordered a new cable. And then I called in a favor from a buddy who worked in security systems. Together, we installed two things Karen wouldn't see. A motion-triggered camera hidden near the charger, and a small modification to the charger itself. It was simple. If someone tried to use the charger without authorization, the system would lock up, triggering a safety override that caused the cable to heat just enough to trip an alarm. Not enough to start a fire, just enough to scare the living daylights out of whoever was freeloading. 2 nights later, my camera caught her. Karen, creeping into my driveway in the dead of night, looking around like a teenager sneaking a cigarette. She plugged in her Tesla, crossed her arms, and smirked as though she'd outsmarted me again. Then the charger lit up red. A faint buzzing sound filled the air. She frowned, bent down, and touched the cable. The alarm shrieked. Karen screamed, yanked the cable out, and stumbled backward into her car. The camera caught everything, The panic, the flailing, the way she nearly tripped over her own heels. She tore out of the driveway, headlights blazing into the night. I sat at my computer, replaying the footage with my morning coffee. It was better than television. But the victory wasn't just petty satisfaction. It was leverage. I now had video evidence of her trespassing and tampering. And I knew exactly what to do with it. The next HOA meeting, I walked in with a flash drive. Karen was already there, binder in hand, ready to launch into a tirade about how I was endangering the neighborhood with unsafe electrical modifications. When it was my turn to speak, I simply plugged in the drive, hit play, and let the video roll on the projector. The room filled with Karen's panic scream, the shriek of the alarm, her clumsy scramble into her car. The board sat frozen, wide-eyed, while neighbors muffled laughter behind their hands. When the video ended, I turned to the board. "This is who's been trespassing on my property, vandalizing my charger, and endangering herself. I'd like to file a formal complaint." Karen went pale. She stammered something about doctored footage, but the board wasn't buying it. For once, she didn't look like the queen of the courtroom. She looked like what she was, a neighbor caught in her own arrogance. Linda cleared her throat. "Karen, this is serious. If this happens again, we'll escalate to law enforcement." The neighbors nodded. George coughed into his hand again, failing to hide his grin. Karen didn't storm out this time. She just sat there, rigid, her binder clutched to her chest, as though it could shield her from humiliation. But I knew better than to think this was the end. Because people like Karen don't give up after being exposed. They burn hotter, louder, until the flames consume something bigger than they intended. And as I walked home that night, flash drive back in my pocket, I realized the next escalation wasn't going to be eggs or sliced cables. No, Karen was about to gamble everything. And when she did, the fallout would be spectacular. After the video played at the HOA meeting, most people would have slunk off into silence, maybe taken a break from the spotlight. Not Karen. Exposure didn't extinguish her, it just forced her to evolve. That night, as I walked home with the flash drive in my pocket, I could almost feel the gears in her head turning, plotting a bigger move. People like her couldn't stand losing face, and she had just been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. For 3 days it was quiet. Too quiet. No eggs. No late-night plugging. No binder-waving crusades. I knew better than to believe it was over. It was the kind of silence a storm makes when it pulls everything in before tearing loose. The storm arrived Friday evening. I pulled into my driveway after work and froze. Karen's Tesla was parked not just in my driveway but directly in front of my garage, her charging port wide open. And there, hanging from the port, was my charger cable, plugged in like it belonged to her. She wasn't even subtle this time. She sat in the driver's seat reclined, sunglasses on, sipping from a water bottle as if she were lounging at a charging station on the highway. I walked up, calm as ever. "You're trespassing." She rolled her head lazily toward me. "No. I'm utilizing shared infrastructure. As is my right. You saw the video. The board told you to stop." "The board," she said with a sneer, "has no legal authority. This is a civil matter. And I've already spoken to my lawyer." I laughed once, sharply. "A lawyer?" "Yes," she said, sitting up straighter. "And I've been informed that under state law, denial of access to charging infrastructure in a regulated community can be considered discriminatory. You think you're clever, but you're not above the law." It was nonsense. I knew it. She knew it. But her weapon wasn't truth. It was intimidation. Throw enough jargon, threats, and paperwork at people, and most fold. That was her strategy. I didn't rise to it. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of her car, the cable, her smug expression. "Great," I said. "Now I have more evidence for when I call the sheriff." Her confidence faltered for a fraction of a second. Then she yanked the cable out, threw it onto the ground, and peeled away, tires squealing down the street. The next morning, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a cease and desist letter, official-looking, with bold legal fonts and plenty of threatening phrases. According to this letter, I was harassing and discriminating against Karen by denying her access to community-provided charging resources. It demanded that I cease withholding power and allow her reasonable access. The kicker? It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from a website that sells template legal documents. She hadn't even bothered to change the generic placeholders. Half the letter still referred to Tenant A and Tenant B. I almost framed it. But then, 2 days later, things escalated again. At 6 a.m., I was woken by a knock at the door. Standing there was a sheriff's deputy, expression grim. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. A claim of electrical tampering." I sighed. "Let me guess, Red Tesla?" He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. I invited him in, showed him the charger, the clean installation, the utility inspection report, even the video of Karen trespassing. By the time I finished, his stern look had softened into the weariness of a man who had better things to do on a Saturday morning. "Sorry to bother you," he said finally. "We'll note this as a false report. Would you mind if I filed my own?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "For trespassing and vandalism," I said. "I have video." He considered it, then nodded. "We'll start a file. If it continues, we'll take it further." That was the first official line Karen had crossed. She wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was wasting law enforcement's time, which never ends well for the caller. But she wasn't done. 3 nights later, I caught her again on camera. This time, she wasn't trying to charge. She was pouring something into the soil near my garage. At first, I thought it was fertilizer. Then I checked the spot the next morning. A patch of grass had gone yellow, edges curling like they'd been burned. She was trying to kill my lawn. Petty. Childish. Infuriating. I didn't confront her. Instead, I bought new grass seed, fertilized the spot, and watched it grow back stronger within a week. The camera footage went into my growing file of evidence. The real twist came a few days later when the HOA board called an emergency meeting. Apparently, Karen had filed yet another motion, this time demanding that the HOA install a communal EV charging station, funded by neighborhood dues. When I walked into the meeting, I already knew how it would go. The room was packed with neighbors, most of whom had watched her antics for years. Karen stood at the front, binder in hand, gesturing dramatically about sustainable infrastructure and future-proofing the community. But then Linda, the board chair, asked the obvious question: where would this station go? Karen didn't miss a beat. "On his property," she said, pointing straight at me. The room erupted. People shouted, laughed, protested. George nearly choked on his water. Linda slammed her gavel. "Karen, that's not possible. We cannot force a homeowner to give up private property for community use." Karen's face reddened. "Then we'll take it by eminent domain." I actually laughed out loud at that one. "Karen, eminent domain is for highways, not HOAs." But she was dead serious. "You think you're safe hiding behind your garage? You're not. This community will get what it needs." Neighbors started booing. Some shouted back about rising dues, others about how insane the idea was. For once, it wasn't just me standing against her. It was everyone. The motion was voted down unanimously. Karen stormed out, binder slamming shut like a thunderclap. That night, I sat in my living room, thinking. She had just lost the board. She had lost the neighbors. She had even lost face with the sheriff. That meant only one thing. Her next move was going to be desperate, reckless, dangerous. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, the charger alarm went off again. But this time, it wasn't the faint buzz I'd rigged before. It was a piercing, sustained shriek that meant someone had forced the connection. I ran to the window. Karen's Tesla was jammed against my garage, smoke curling from the charging port. She was inside, frantically trying to disconnect, but the heat had already warped the plastic. Sparks snapped in the night air, illuminating her panicked face. I grabbed my phone and hit record. For a moment, I thought the car might actually catch fire. Then, with a final pop, the system shut down. Karen stumbled out, coughing, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with fury and fear. She saw me at the window, holding my phone. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just glared, climbed back into the smoking Tesla, and roared away into the night. The next morning, scorch marks still blackened the pavement of my driveway. The smell of burnt plastic lingered in the air. And I knew, we'd just reached the point of no return. Karen's obsession had finally blown up in her face. Literally. The morning after Karen nearly turned her Tesla into a rolling bonfire, I expected sirens, investigators, maybe even the fire marshal knocking at my door. But there was nothing. Just scorch marks across my driveway, a faint chemical smell, and the memory of Karen's wild eyes when she realized her car had betrayed her. I figured she'd retreat, lick her wounds, maybe nurse her pride in silence. But Karen didn't retreat. She doubled down. At noon, a new email from the HOA hit my inbox. Subject line: Urgent complaint of reckless endangerment. I opened it and almost spit out my coffee. Karen had filed yet another grievance, this time claiming that I had sabotaged her Tesla with a malicious booby trap, disguised as an EV charger. She wrote that I had endangered community safety and weaponized electrical infrastructure to target her personally. Weaponized electrical infrastructure. That phrase alone almost made me admire her creativity. Almost. But the real kicker was her demand. She wanted me fined by the HOA and forced to remove my charger completely. The board scheduled another hearing for the following week. At this point, I was convinced half the board members were going to quit just to escape Karen's orbit. In the meantime, my neighbors started coming out of the woodwork. First was George, the weary secretary, who knocked on my door that evening. "Listen," he said, "I just want you to know I'm sick of her. Everyone's sick of her. If she keeps dragging us into this, we're backing you." Then came Angela, the mom from 2 houses down. "Karen told my kids you electrocuted her car," she said, rolling her eyes. "Don't worry, we don't believe her. Just hang in there." Even old Mrs. Kravitz, who never got involved in anything except her cats, leaned over the fence one afternoon to mutter, "She deserves whatever's coming." It was like the neighborhood was finally waking up, realizing they'd been living under the reign of a tyrant disguised as a homeowner. But Karen wasn't finished. 3 days later, I came home to find her Tesla parked diagonally across the street, hazard lights flashing, hood propped open. She was pacing beside it, phone pressed to her ear, voice raised for everyone to hear. "He tampered with it again," she shouted. "Yes, officer, I'm telling you, my neighbor is trying to kill me with that charger." I stopped at my mailbox, watching her perform. The Tesla looked even worse now, front grille warped, bumper dented, probably from hitting a curb in her rage. But the way she spoke into the phone, you'd think I'd planted explosives under her car. Neighbors gathered at their windows, shaking their heads. Some even filmed her from their porches. Karen, oblivious, kept pacing, shouting about conspiracies and sabotage until finally a patrol car rolled up. The officer stepped out, calm and unamused. I didn't hear everything, but I caught enough. He looked at her car, looked at me, then asked Karen, "Do you have proof he did this?" Her voice rose to a shriek. "Of course. Who else would? He's been targeting me for weeks." The officer nodded slowly, then said something that made her jaw drop. "Ma'am, maybe it's time you considered that your vehicle has a manufacturer issue." That single sentence nearly broke her. She sputtered, she flailed, but the officer didn't budge. Eventually, he took down a report and drove away, leaving Karen standing there, humiliated once again in front of her captive audience of neighbors. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the breaking point. But I underestimated her desperation. The HOA hearing arrived, and this time Karen came armed not just with her binder but with a laptop, a projector, and what she claimed was video evidence. She strutted into the community center like a prosecutor unveiling a smoking gun. When her turn came, she dimmed the lights, fired up the projector, and pressed play. The video was laughable. A blurry clip of my driveway at night, shot from some angle that barely showed anything. She claimed it proved I had rigged the charger with hidden devices, but in reality, it was just shaky footage of me coiling the cable after mowing the lawn. She paused, rewound, circled random shadows on the screen with her laser pointer, declaring them to be explosive devices. The board stared at her like she'd lost her mind. When it was my turn, I stood up, plugged in my own flash drive, and played my video, the one showing her sneaking onto my property, plugging in her Tesla, then panicking when the alarm tripped. The contrast was devastating. When the lights came back on, Linda rubbed her temples. "Karen, this is out of control. We've warned you. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to escalate this legally." Karen's face twisted. "So you're taking his side? You're all in on it, aren't you?" The board dismissed her complaint unanimously. Again and again she stormed out, binder clutched to her chest like a life raft. But the damage was done to her. Over the next week, whispers spread through the neighborhood. Parents warned their kids not to go near her. People crossed the street when she walked by. The once feared Karen had become a pariah. And then, the real explosion came, figuratively this time, though it felt just as dramatic. One evening, as the sun set, I was sitting on my porch with a beer when a tow truck rumbled into the cul-de-sac. It backed up to Karen's Tesla, flashing yellow lights painting the houses. Neighbors emerged, curious. Karen bolted out of her house in a frenzy. "What are you doing? You can't take my car." The driver handed her a clipboard. "Ma'am, this vehicle has been flagged for repossession." The collective gasp from the neighborhood was almost cinematic. Karen screamed, wailed, begged. She shouted about conspiracies, about how I had ruined her life, about how the HOA had betrayed her. But it didn't matter. The tow truck hooked the Tesla, lifted it, and hauled it away while the entire street watched. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension ease. Not gone, but shifted. Karen had lost her most prized possession, her symbol of superiority. Without that gleaming Tesla parked in her driveway, she was just another neighbor in an aging SUV. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Because humiliation like that doesn't end wars. It ignites them. That night, I caught her on camera again. She wasn't trying to charge this time. She was standing in my driveway, staring at the scorch marks that still marred the concrete. Just staring, silent, like she was carving a promise into her memory. Then she turned, glared straight into the camera, and mouthed 3 words. "This isn't over." And I believed her. When Karen mouthed those 3 words into my camera, "This isn't over," it felt less like a threat and more like a vow. And if I had learned anything by then, it was that Karen never broke her vows. She lived for conflict, for the high of escalation, for the warped satisfaction of dragging everyone down with her. So when her Tesla got repossessed, I didn't relax. I watched. I waited. And I prepared. The first sign of her next move came on a Tuesday morning. I stepped outside to find flyers taped to every mailbox on the street. They were printed on neon yellow paper, bold black font across the top. Danger. Illegal electrical activity in our neighborhood. I pulled one off my mailbox and scanned it. It was a manifesto in miniature, half warnings, half accusations. According to Karen, I had turned my home into a makeshift power plant that posed a severe fire hazard to every family in the community. She accused me of hoarding energy, profiting off illegal sales, and, my favorite, operating a secret surveillance system to spy on neighbors. The neighbors weren't buying it anymore. I saw people balling up the flyers, tossing them in the trash without reading past the headline. Angela from down the street walked by, holding one like it was contaminated, and muttered, "She's lost it." But I didn't laugh. Not this time. Because the flyers weren't just noise, they were groundwork. She was trying to create a story, to sow fear, to set the stage for something bigger. That something arrived 3 nights later. I woke at 1:45 a.m. to the sound of pounding. Not on my door, on my garage. I grabbed my phone, opened the security feed, and there she was. Karen, hammer in hand, slamming it against the side of my charger. Sparks flew. For a moment, my heart pounded with real fear. If she damaged the wiring, it could start a fire. I called 911, voice calm but urgent, explaining the situation. Then I stayed on the line, watching. By the time the patrol car pulled up, Karen had switched tactic. She was sprawled dramatically across my driveway, clutching the hammer like a murder victim clutching the weapon. When the officers approached, she sat up and shouted, "He attacked me! He tried to electrocute me with his charger." I walked outside, phone still recording, and said evenly, "Check the camera footage. Check the scorch marks on the hammer. Check the fact that I've been inside this whole time." The officers separated us, took statements, and then did exactly what I'd asked. Reviewed the footage. It showed Karen marching into my driveway, hammer raised, striking the charger. It showed sparks, panic, and her dramatic flop to the ground. The officers weren't amused. They cuffed her on the spot for trespassing, vandalism, and filing a false police report. The neighbors, awakened by the flashing lights, gathered at their windows to watch Karen scream as she was led to the squad car. Her voice echoed through the cul-de-sac. "You're all going to regret this. He's the real criminal." And then she was gone. I thought that might be the end of it, that a night in holding, maybe a fine, would finally break her momentum. But Karen had reserves of stubbornness deeper than I imagined. The very next afternoon, she was back. Not in cuffs, not apologizing. Back in her driveway, pacing with her phone glued to her ear, binder clutched to her chest. I later learned she'd bailed herself out within hours. And instead of shame, she came back with fresh fury. By evening, a new twist unfolded. A TV news van pulled into the neighborhood. Bright logo on the side, reporters stepping out with a camera operator in tow. I watched from my porch as Karen led them across the cul-de-sac, gesturing dramatically at my garage, pointing at the scorch marks on the pavement, rattling off her greatest hits of accusations. I almost admired her boldness. She wasn't just fighting me anymore, she was trying to control the narrative on a bigger stage. So I did the one thing she didn't expect. I didn't hide. When the reporter finally knocked on my door, I stepped out, calm and collected. "Happy to talk," I said. "But only on the record." The reporter blinked, surprised. Most people confronted on their doorstep shrink or deflect. I invited them in, poured coffee, and showed them everything. The utility inspection report, the HOA meeting footage, the video of Karen sneaking in to charge, the footage of her with the hammer. The reporter's eyebrows climbed higher with each clip. "This isn't exactly what she told us," she admitted. "Shocking," I deadpanned. By the time the segment aired 2 nights later, Karen wasn't the hero of sustainable energy she'd painted herself to be. She was the unhinged neighbor caught vandalizing someone else's property. The fallout was immediate. Neighbors who'd tolerated her antics for years finally turned openly against her. Parents refused to let their kids visit her house. People whispered in the grocery store. She wasn't feared anymore. She was ridiculed. But humiliation only made her more dangerous. The real climax came 2 weeks later. I was in my kitchen when the power flickered, then went out entirely. Total blackout. The whole street plunged into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped outside, and followed the sound of movement. At the end of the cul-de-sac, near the communal transformer box, there she was. Karen, crouched with a crowbar, prying at the locked panel. "Karen!" I shouted. She spun, wild-eyed, hair tangled, crowbar raised like a weapon. "If I can't have power, no one will," she shrieked. That was it. The final unraveling. She wasn't fighting for access anymore. She was trying to drag us all into the dark with her. I backed away, phone raised, already dialing 911. Within minutes, squad cars arrived, lights flashing against the blacked-out street. The officers swarmed her, wrestled the crowbar away, and cuffed her again as she screamed about conspiracies, about how we were all against her, about how I had engineered her downfall. This time, they didn't just let her out in a few hours. This time it stuck. As the power company restored electricity, neighbors gathered in small clusters, murmuring relief, shaking their head. George walked over, patted my shoulder, and said, "You've done what none of us could. You finally broke her." I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. Watching Karen shoved into the squad car, screaming into the night, I felt something else. The heavy silence that follows a storm. Because yes, she was gone, for now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that people like Karen never truly disappear. They linger, in paperwork, in lawsuits, in rumors that echo long after the shouting stops. For the first time since this war began, I wondered if winning against someone like her was even possible. And I realized, the real ending hadn't come yet. It was still building. Waiting. Karen's arrest at the transformer should have been the end. The neighbors thought it was. They celebrated quietly that night, porch lights glowing again, kids laughing in yards, people trading relieved smiles as if a curse had been lifted. For the first time in months, the cul-de-sac felt normal. Peaceful. But I knew better. People like Karen don't fade out gracefully. They claw, they thrash, they drag their stories into every forum that will listen. And sure enough, within days, the echoes began. First came the letters. Not from Karen herself, she was still being held for psychiatric evaluation after the transformer stunt, but from her so-called representatives. Each envelope was stamped with the letterhead of a law office downtown. Inside, the same accusations repeated in stiff legalese. Reckless endangerment, harassment, discrimination. Threats of lawsuits if I didn't cease operation of the hazardous charging device. I brought the letters to a lawyer of my own, a pragmatic woman named Cynthia, who read them over with a smirk. "She's grasping at straws," she said. "These aren't lawsuits. They're scare tactics. If anything real comes of it, you'll know. Until then, file them and ignore." So I did. Each letter went into a binder of my own, a mirror to Karen's beloved binder, only mine was full of facts, reports, videos, and evidence that painted the full picture of her obsession. Then came the gossip. Somehow, even from confinement, she managed to get her version of events onto a local Facebook group. Posts appeared accusing me of endangering families with unlicensed equipment and targeting women in the neighborhood. Most people dismissed it, but a handful of strangers chimed in, defending her, calling me selfish. It was surreal, watching her rewrite reality from behind locked doors. But the real storm came on the day of the HOA's annual meeting. It was supposed to be routine. A budget discussion, landscaping updates, maybe a debate about whether the pool should open earlier in spring. But everyone knew it wasn't going to be routine. The community center was packed, neighbors crammed shoulder to shoulder, the air buzzing with anticipation. Karen wasn't there physically, but her shadow loomed over every seat. Linda, the board chair, called the meeting to order. She looked tired, like she'd aged 10 years since Karen started her crusade. After the usual announcements, she cleared her throat. "There is one final item on the agenda. It concerns the ongoing conflict between two residents over the use of private property." Murmurs swept through the room. All eyes turned to me. Linda continued, "As you know, this dispute has consumed significant time and resources. The board has reviewed the reports, the footage, and the complaints, and we've come to a decision." She paused, scanning the room. "Effective immediately, the board recognizes that EV chargers installed on private property are the sole responsibility and privilege of that homeowner. They are not shared amenities. Unauthorized use constitutes trespassing." The room erupted in applause. Not polite claps, full-throated relief, cheers even. George clapped so hard I thought his hands might break. Angela gave me a thumbs up. It wasn't just a policy decision. It was a verdict. The HOA had drawn a line in the sand, one Karen could never cross again. But Karen wasn't done. A week later, she returned. Released, thinner, her hair pulled back tight, eyes sharper than ever. She didn't storm into my driveway or tape complaints to doors this time. She walked the cul-de-sac slowly, deliberately, clipboard in hand, knocking on doors. Petitioning. I watched from my porch as neighbor after neighbor shook their head, closed their door, turned away. Whatever grip she once had, it was gone. She was radioactive now, untouchable. Finally, she reached my house. She stopped at the end of my driveway, clipboard pressed to her chest, and stared at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, voice hoarse, "This isn't over." It was the same phrase she'd mouthed into my camera weeks earlier. But now it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a prayer. Like she was trying to convince herself. I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee, calm as ever, and let the silence crush her. She turned, walked back to her house, and shut the door. That was the last time she tried to fight me directly. Over the following months, Karen's presence shrank. The Tesla never came back. The binder didn't appear at meetings. Her yard grew untidy, weeds pushing through cracks in her driveway. Neighbors whispered that she'd lost her job, that her savings were gone, that she was too busy fighting battles in courtrooms no one else cared about. One day, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. It lingered for weeks. No buyers. Then one morning, I woke to see a moving truck in her driveway. She loaded boxes alone, no friends helping, no neighbors waving goodbye. By evening, she was gone. The cul-de-sac exhaled. Life returned to normal. Kids rode bikes again without parents worrying about being yelled at. The board meetings ended early for the first time in years. My charger hummed quietly, faithfully, without interruption. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself glancing at the driveway across the street, half expecting to see her Tesla nosed up against my garage, cable dangling, Karen leaning against the hood with that smug little smile. And every time, I felt the same mixture of relief and unease. Because while Karen was gone, the war she waged left scars. On the neighborhood, on the HOA, even on me. Yet in the end, I had won. Not with shouting, not with fists, not even with revenge. I had won by outlasting her. By staying calm when she burned herself alive with fury. By documenting, by waiting, by letting her expose herself one act at a time. And that was the real lesson, the one I carried with me long after she moved away. Sometimes the best trap isn't mechanical. It isn't a rigged charger or an alarm system. Sometimes the best trap is patience. The kind that lets your enemy keep digging until they've buried themselves. Karen buried herself deep. And me? I just kept sipping my coffee.